Hi students, hope everyone is fine and safe. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to my new video, and today's video is about another interesting topic in the subject microprocessor, microcontroller and interfacing techniques. We are going to see pin configuration of 8051. This is going to be a very interesting concept because whatever project which you are going to do using microcontroller, using 8051, you have to be aware of this pin configuration, right? So we're going to study in detail about what are the various pins and what are those configurations of 8051, right? So to start with, I'll just tell you the outline about 8051 pin configuration. In 8051, you'll have around 40 pins, right? And out of those 40 pins, 32 pins are input output ports, can be configured as input output ports. That is, you have 4 different ports, that is P0, P1, P2 and P3. You can see those numbers here, P0, P1, P2, P3, right? And out of this 32, the 24 pins will be dual purpose pin, right? So you have total 40 pins. Out of those 40 pins, 32 pins can be configured as an input output ports, and out of this 32 you have 24 pins which is used for dual purpose. What is my dual purpose? Apart from input output function, right, we can also configure it for address or data bus or control lines like that, right? So that is the overall picture of it. And apart from it, you have the other pins which is used for ground, supply and for other functions, right? Those functions will be for 8 different pins. So totally you have 40 pins in it, right? And now we will see in detail about each and every pin configuration, right? And as I said, you will have 4 different ports, P0, P1, P2 and P3, right? And we'll start with P1, P0 port first, right? So as I said, in 8051 you'll have 40 pin, that is, it is a 40 pin device, and in that you have 32 pins as an input output port, right? And as I said, if it is dual purpose, we can configure it either for input output, or you can also configure it for control line, address bus or data bus. It can be used, right? And first we will consider port 0, right? And as I said, port 0, if you take port 0, it is a dual purpose, and you can see the port numbers here, that is the pin numbers here. The port 0, you can see it starts from 32 to 39. You can see this is the port pin number for P0, and similarly you can see for pin 1, port 1, you can see it is from 1 to 8, right? And similarly you have pins for port 3 as well, and similarly for port 2, right? So this pin numbers are very important, okay? So, and for port 0, as I said, it is from 32 to 39, which is 8 pins, right? And to this port we can configure it either as for an input or output ports, right? And as I said, it is a dual purpose, right? And more importantly, for port 0, you don't have an inbuilt pull-up resistor. We have to connect externally the pull-up resistor, right? So what is pull-up resistor first, right? Because port 0 is an open drain, so definitely we need to connect a pull-up resistor. What is the function of pull-up resistor? We have two resistors, that is pull-up and pull-down. Normally pull-up resistor, which is used to make the signal line stable, right? Say for example, if you want the signal line to be in the higher state, right? So we will use pull-up resistor, and similarly we use pull-down resistor to make the signal low, right? To make the signal very low, right? That is to stay in the low, we can use pull-down resistor, right? So how this pull-up resistor will be connected? It will be connected between the signal line and as well as between the signal line and the voltage line, right? You can see this diagram, right? We have to connect the 10 kilo ohm resistor as a pull-up resistor, that will be between the signal line and the VCC, right? So this will act as a pull-up resistor where it will make the signal line to be stable in the higher state. And similarly, pull-down resistor may be used in some other configurations where that is to make the device to make the signal to be in the lower state, right? And for port 1, for port 1, it is a dedicated input output port, right? It is not a dual purpose. As I said, out of 32 pins of input output, you will have 24 pins as dual purpose, correct? And the 8 pin which is not dual purpose, which is a dedicated purpose of IO port, is port 1, right? And mostly port 1 is used for interfacing, where it can able to interface switches, LEDs, keyboards, everything, right? So that is the purpose of port 1, which is used as a dedicated IO port, and it does not need any pull-up resistor and externally, because it has inbuilt one, right? And similarly port 2, once again port 2 is a dual purpose, where whenever I say dual purpose, we can say that it can act as an input output port, and as well as it can be configured as control lines, address bus, or data bus, right? And even port 2 will not require any external pull-up resistor. Only port 0 we need to have an external pull-up resistor, right? And port 3, you have to be aware of port 3 here. As I said, even though there is 32 pins for input output port, designers mostly will not prefer port 3 for IO, that is for input output, right? That's because port 3 has some special functions, right? This can be configured for some special functions. You can see port 10, that is used for RXT, and port pin 11, which is used for TXT. See, all this I'll explain once we see the architecture diagram. Okay, so each and everything will have its own functions. So pin 10 and pin 11, it is used in serial ports, that is TXT and RXT. And similarly port 13, right, you can see it is INT, interrupt 1, and pin 12, it is used for interrupt 0, and similarly pin 14, timer 0 and timer 1, and similarly we have pin 16 and pin 17 for read and write operations, right? So these are the different functions which is used for port 3. So designers most probably will not prefer port 3 for IO, that is for input output. They will prefer only for special functions, right? So, and all these ports P0, P1, P2, P3, whenever they reset, it can act as an output port, right? So that is about ports, right? And you can see the port 3 where different functions of port 3 pins. You can see that P3.0, right, that is RXT, that is nothing but it is used to receive data from the serial port. As I said, it is used for a serial port. RXT is nothing but to receive data from serial port, and TXT is nothing but to transmit data in serial port, and INT 0 is nothing but external interrupt. I'll tell you interrupt while explaining the architecture, right? So you have external interrupt, you have a timer interrupt, and as well as serial interrupt. And according to 8051, you will have 5 interrupts, right? And P3.2, it refers to external interrupt 0, and 3.3 it is external interrupt 1, and similarly this is timer interrupt, timer external interrupt, and similarly this is timer 1, right? So this is timer and timer 1, and similarly this read and write operation, that is whenever we need to write an external right, that is we need to write a data in the external memory, right? Then we can use write strobe signal, right? So that can be configured in P3.6, and similarly to read data from the external memory, the read strobe, that is read signal, can be configured in this particular pin or D, right? And these are the other pins, that is apart from 40 pins, you have remaining 8 pins which is used for configuration purpose, that is ground, supply, and for reset pin number 9, and VCC is used for pin 40, and similarly ground is at pin 20, right? And you will have oscillator in the 8051, right? So oscillator is for timing and synchronization purpose, and for that you will have an external oscillator. That external oscillator can be connected through this particular pin 18 and pin 19, external 1 and external 2, which is nothing but this is like an input for that oscillator, and this will act as an output. And similarly you have something called program store enable, which is used to access the external memory, right? And similarly you have ALU, address latch enable. Address latch enable, it is at pin 30. This is an interesting pin which is used for demultiplexing the address bus or the data bus, right? And similarly, EA is another pin which is also used to access the external program memory, right? So this is the pin configuration of 8051. So all you have to do is you have to understand what are the different ports and what are the different pin numbers. Those pin numbers is very important. Okay, for port 0, the pin number is from 32 to 39, right? And similarly for port 1, you have different set of pins, right? And similarly for port 2, you have, it starts from port 1 to port 28, and similarly port 3, you have a different set of pins, right? And everything will be shown in this diagram itself, so that you can understand very easily which port refers to or which pin number, right? You can see here pin 1 from 1 to 8, and similarly port 0 starts from 32 to 38, and similarly port 2 that starts from 21 to 28, and the port 3 pins, it starts from 10 to 17, right? That is very important. And out of this, port 1 is a dedicated input output port, right? And apart from it, each and every pin has its own functions, right? So today what we have seen is we have seen the port configuration of 8051, and I have explained about different ports, and we have also seen what is the use of pull-up resistors, what are the different pins that is used in port 3, that is different functions, right? I hope this video will be very useful for you. Thank you very much. Thank you, students.
Thank you, students. Thank you for watching. கண்டிப்பாக இந்த வீடியோ உங்களுக்கு எல்லாருக்கும் ரொம்ப யூஸ்ஃபுல்லாக இருக்கும் நம்புகிறேன். Subscribe Passionate Professor and keep learning. Thank you very much.